Welcome everybody to this week's MindFuel Moments. Today I'm joined by Mark, who is the VP of our service industries, and you're joining me to talk a bit about sustainability, but from the perspective of our service industries rather than from manufacturing, which is obviously what I was doing prior to changing roles at IFS. And obviously Colin and I have been talking about sustainability probably more than anybody cares to hear us drone on about it anymore. But obviously we've talked about it from a manufacturing perspective, but I'm really interested to get your thoughts on how you look at this from a service perspective. So without further ado, if somebody doesn't know what service is or what the service industry is, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Helen. Yeah, great question. Well, services, it's a really broad sector because, it represents something like 80% of Western economy, GDP. We are service-driven economies here in Europe, the UK, the States, for example. And so that's what service is. So what does it encompass? Well, essentially anything that doesn't revolve around a product. Okay, so a service could be insurance, it is retail, your telco provider is you're receiving a service, even the guy you call for your pest control when you've got a rat infestation, if you had something like that. So those are all service industries. But also, interestingly, you mentioned manufacturing. The majority of manufacturers today have a substantial service arm to their organization as well. So when you sell elevators, actually, do you know in an elevator company, the typical distribution is 30% product revenue and 70% service revenue. It would be the same in something like the automotive industry, where you're trying to service vehicles through a dealer network, in that example, or even anything like HVAC, for example, heating and ventilation, for example. So it's a huge sector. It encompasses anything that's not, if you like, product driven, and it represents the vast majority of revenue of GDP in major economies today.
And you've talked about obviously the product, and the product is clearly very important in terms of how businesses go about making sure that they're being sustainable. And again, Colin and I have talked an awful lot this year about the circular economy, which obviously factors in a huge part of that is the service element. So I wanted to again get your thoughts on how do you feel the service industry sector contributes towards the circular economy?
Well, the interesting thing is service, it has sustainability as its very ethos. The whole idea of keeping the car on the road, keeping the aircraft flying, keeping the mining machine running for as long as possible, keeping the elevator moving for 30 years or more. Without service, those would be items that we discard at the first problem. And as a consequence, their life cycle would be massively concatenated. So the very ethos of service is living the world of sustainability to keep the wind turbine running for 10 years rather than 2 weeks when it has its first problem. Whether that's changing parts on the unit, whether that's recalibrating the unit, whether that's just performing a basic maintenance procedure. It's all about having that asset extend the longevity of its lifetime. So sustainability is at the core of that, sector.
And you've talked obviously about extending the life cycle, about elevators obviously working for 30 years. So can you give me any other examples of sustainability opportunities?
This industry is littered with them. So, let's go from a simple example at quite a low level. Think about a company that sends out technicians to your and my home to repair the refrigerator. Excuse me. They've got, hundreds potentially of engineers on the road every week. And think about you're not their only visit for that day. A refrigerator guy might fix 6 or 7 in one day. And so just getting the sequence of the jobs correct and getting the route optimized for the shortest duration of travel has a significant bearing on the CO2. So there's fuel usage, for example. That's a very granular, tangible example. You may be familiar most recently in the EU and in the States, there's this legislation around the right to repair has started to come in, to allow at least us to, on the washing machine, change the soap dispenser drawer, for example, or on the refrigerator, maybe to change the ice making mechanism. And again, that's about service, but it's about now putting the service in the hands of you and I, DIY, or sort of frictionless service, as we're calling it. And then another simple one. Let's say I want to attempt to fix my refrigerator because the power supply is broken. Maybe I'm getting a little ambitious now. You know, at least I need the ability to read some technical documentation at a consumer level and then know what to order from a spare part point of view. So even being able to arm me with instructions as to what to order and make that process seamless is another opportunity. So, you know, so many different elements that make up the opportunity to drive the sustainable model.
And I think even if I was armed with all the instructions in the world, I wouldn't have a hope of trying to do any of this myself. So I'd still have to rely on an engineer or somebody with the knowledge to help me. So you've talked there about some kind of general examples. So last question from me is, you know, have you got any IFS customer examples that you can share?
Yeah, there's a myriad. I mean, a recent one, a really good one. There's one of the Europe's largest electrical retailers. Okay, we're working with them. They have a real problem with their returns process. I think we're all familiar with the returns process. You know, my mobile phone. You know, I don't get an engineer come out to fix that. I take it to the store. Maybe I take it to, you know, the Vodafone store, the T-Mobile store, whatever it might be. Believe it or not, behind that is quite a complex reverse logistics process. You know, I hand it over. The first thing they do is check the warranty status. Am I entitled to a repair? Do I get what's called a same unit repair, which is I wait for that exact model to come back to me, mine, to be fixed? Or do I get an advanced replacement? They give me a new one while they fix the old one, as it were. So, you know, that's just a contract rule. And then somebody picks it up from the store, you know, a 3PL. They take it to an inspection depot. They determine what's wrong with it. Is it the battery? Is it the screen? Is it the, you know, the antenna? And depending on what's wrong with that, it goes different paths. And then all, you know, so this is quite a complex process. Industry statistics say it's 12 times more steps than just sending a product out the door when you sell something, forward logistics. So, you know, we're mastering that process for Europe's largest electrical retailer. And they gave us a great statistic the other day. For every 3 refrigerators that they recycle, it's like taking 1 car off the road. So, you know, really cool and very worthwhile endeavor, of course. Another might be, I talked about mobile phones there. We work with another client that manufactures phones, handsets. I won't name the name, but they have a huge challenge in planning what's called swap stock. To you and I, swap stock is the replacement phone we get if ours goes wrong, okay, to fix the broken unit. And forecasting that with the end of life of a phone being very short these days, you know, 12 months potentially, they ended up in certain scenarios with over 100,000 units, excuse me, 100,000 redundant units at the end of the life cycle of that phone, which they couldn't do anything with. So by much improved planning of the swap stock, we got that down to 3,000 handsets. That's 97,000 handsets saved from landfill. So that's a planning and forecasting example. You know, so that's 2 examples. One is the electrical retailer with the returns process. The other is the mobile phone manufacturer with the planning and forecasting process. So all within the service sector, but all huge sustainability contributors.
Awesome, thank you very much. And I have to say, I loved how when you referenced antenna, you almost pulled it up on the mobile phone, like a yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark, for joining me. It's great, obviously, from my perspective, to kind of widen the conversation around sustainability. So we're moving it out of just being something we talk about from a manufacturing perspective or energy, and obviously into service industries, and some great examples there, I think. And it's brilliant that they're using IFS to do all of that. So on behalf of myself, thank you very much for watching. On behalf of Mark, thank you for joining us, and I will see you the same time next week. Goodbye.
Thanks.